Thank you and welcome back to the Patriots 300 Level Podcast. My name is Eric. I'm joined by my co-host Kevin. Welcome back for our 72nd episode this week where we have a special guest on, Dan Kelley, who we're very excited to have on. We're going to be discussing the quarterback prospects in the upcoming NFL draft. Dan can be found on Twitter/X at Dan Kelley66. Dan is the head writer at Patriots Football Now, which can be found at patriotsfootballnow.com. Dan's also a really good follow on Twitter. We've been following him for years, ever since we first started. We really enjoy reading his content, his articles, and opinions. And all Patriots fans, we really recommend that you go check him out.
And I think one thing too with Dan that we really like about your content is that you're not really there to try and make like the grandiose opinion to try and just get clicks and all that sort of stuff. You're really giving really good insight, and it's your opinion each time, not something that's like, oh, this will get me 5 million views on this and whatnot. So we really appreciate the content you're putting out and that you're being true to yourself and what you actually believe in. So it's one of the breaths of fresh air on Twitter and the blog posts.
Excellent. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, so like Eric said, the first we're going to be talking about the quarterbacks for the draft. That everyone knows that the Patriots are in need of a franchise quarterback. So we figured we can kind of discuss first, kind of just your thoughts on each of kind of the big five, I'd say, of the quarterbacks that are out there for the draft. We all know that Williams is probably going number one, so we don't have to hit too much on him. But I am interested in just kind of seeing how do you think he'll perform in the NFL? Because I know every quarterback that's in the draft this year has question marks, so no one's the perfect kind of prospect. And Williams pretty much has all the kind of physical aspects. It's just kind of some of the like leadership. They had trouble against ranked teams last year. He did play on a team that did have a poor defense. So was it just that, or was he trying to do too much? And how is that really going to translate into the NFL? So just kind of interested in your thoughts on him first before we get into the potential actual prospects that could actually draft.
Yeah, I think for Caleb Williams, I think he's being put in an excellent situation in Chicago. It's not a team that has their own number one pick. They're not drafting number one because they were the worst team in the league. They're drafted number one, obviously, because they made the trade with Carolina last year. That gives them the opportunity, in addition to taking him, they're going to add something at number 9. They already got DJ Moore as part of that deal, and he had a great first season in Chicago. They signed Keenan Allen. They have Cole Kmet at tight end, who's very serviceable there. So he has a lot of things working to his advantage, including the fact that, not to bring everything back to the Patriots, but a guy like Mac Jones is coming in following Tom Brady. And no matter who they bring in at the number 3 pick, assuming they stick there, that guy to some degree is going to be compared to Tom Brady. That's going to last for quite some time around here, probably until there's another championship. So he doesn't have that in Chicago. The last great quarterback for the Chicago Bears was probably Sid Luckman in the 1930s. So, Jim McMahon had 1985, and that's about it. So as far as Williams, I'm not the biggest fan. He's not as big as I normally like my quarterback, and he does not have great feet. He's not set in a lot of his throws. The same can be said about Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen too. So certainly the ability to improvise is something that, it works in his favor. He has a ton of talent. But when I was asked in an interview recently who I would most compare him to, the first person that came to mind was Kyrie Irving, who isn't even a football player. He's just an uber talented guy who might be a little too smart for his own good or think that he is. And then he has all the talent in the world. So do I think he could thrive in the NFL? Certainly. If I had the number 1 overall pick as the Patriots, I wouldn't draft Caleb Williams. If I have number 1 overall pick as the Bears and I have Keenan Allen, who he respects already on the roster, and I have some nice complementary pieces, especially at wide receiver, I think it's worth the gamble for them. But he's not a slam dunk number 1 overall pick like some of these guys in the past have been to me.
Yep. No, I agree completely. And I think that's something that Eric and I have talked about too, where everyone's saying he's a generational talent, and physically he has a lot of that skills. He's also, like you said, he's not the tallest. I think he's what, 6'1" and three
6'1",
quarters.
yeah.
He's got smaller hands. He doesn't have the largest hands of them all. And he just have those question marks about, can he kind of compete against ranked teams, and we didn't really see it that much. And just he had just some other issues. I don't think any of like the nail painting or any of that stuff is a big deal. But just some of the other kind of question marks about like on the bench and kind of what he looked like when they were losing. He wasn't
Right.
kind of, you look at Brady and you kind of see that fire and compete. And you didn't really see it as much from him, but it's also a different type of athlete now. So
Right.
it's
And
always
it's
going
a
to be hard
different
to,
generation too.
yeah.
Jonathan Jones for the Patriots talked about
Mhm.
that even since the beginning of him coming in, which is 9-10 years ago at this
Mhm.
point, that these athletes need to be coddled a little bit more, and they need
Mhm.
positive feedback, and they need to be told how great they are.
Yeah.
So, it's a different world, and I think some fans haven't transitioned yet. Some media members haven't
Mhm.
transitioned yet. I could care less what color his phone case is or
Mhm.
anything else. I am more concerned with his size, his footwork, his actual fundamentals.
Mhm.
Is when I've studied a ton of film. To
Mhm.
me, the two players with the best fundamentals in terms of throwing motion are Jaden Daniels and JJ McCarthy.
Mhm.
Um, that said, neither one of them is the number one quarterback on my board, because that's
Mhm.
something that you can teach.
Mhm.
But we'll see how he adapts to coaching, how he adapts to adversity, which is something all these guys are going to have to go through. No matter how great they are,
Mhm.
they're going to face more adversity in the NFL than they've ever faced in their lives. So it'll be interesting to see how he handles that. I would feel more comfortable as a GM passing on him and risking him succeeding elsewhere
Mhm.
than drafting him and watching that create a chaos in my locker room.
Yep.
Yep. Good
Completely
point.
agree. So I
Oh,
guess
good.
oh, sorry, what were we gonna say, Kevin?
No, you can go. Mhm.
I was gonna say, I guess that brings us to, as Patriot fans, the big question, assuming or Caleb Williams goes number one, if you have your pick of any of the next quarterbacks, who is the guy for you that you're hoping falls to number three?
Even if Caleb Williams was available,
Yep.
if I had the number one pick as the New England Patriots, I would select Drake May. I think he's the best. I think he has the highest ceiling in the
Mhm.
draft. He Philip Rivers is the guy he most reminds me of. He's not as big as Josh Allen, but he's a good sized guy. He's 6'4". I think he weighed 225 at the combine. He has all the physical tools, I think. And same thing happened to Trevor Lawrence when he was coming out. When you're a presumed number one pick for more than a year, I mean, we've seen these guys even in the past month that have arrived on our radar just in a month get picked to shreds.
Mhm.
And someone like Drake May, Caleb Williams too, has been on the radar for multiple seasons, and anything short of a Heisman campaign this year was going to look like a failure.
Mhm.
And he had Des Walker's his only receiver that's really NFL caliber. He only, I think, played 5 games last year for North Carolina.
Mhm.
It wasn't great. They just had a lot of problems. I watched all of his film over the past year. It wasn't perfect, but he is physical. He's tough. He's going to need to learn to get down. He has a great arm, and I have heard Merrill Lodge critique him for his ability to read coverages and see
Mhm.
things before the snap. I didn't see that, and I obviously we all know different analysts can see things differently. I'm not seeing the same things he is. I'm seeing a problem with footwork, being a little too eager to run, being a little too eager to throw on the run instead of planting and throwing. Alex Van Pelt, Patriots' new offensive coordinator, has stressed that as being important to him. So I think the big question we're going to find out is, does he think it's important in terms of he can teach it to someone like Drake May, or does he think it's important like he wants a quarterback that already has that skill set,
Mhm.
like a JJ McCarthy?
Mhm.
But in in my personal opinion, New England Patriots have number one pick. I would be more than comfortable selecting Drake May without hesitation.
Yeah, I think that's something Eric and I agree with too, where people ask, like, oh, who would you want them to pick? And May, looking at them, yes, his footwork is kind of sloppy. And some of his mechanics aren't the best. He kind of falls into a lot of the mistakes that we saw Mac fall into last year with not kind of driving the ball and using most of his arm. The difference, though, between Mac and May is that May has the arm to make up for those mistakes,
100%.
where he doesn't have to be perfect mechanics and everything to get everything on that ball. So that's something that, like you said, his ceiling is really high. He's big. He's got a cannon of an arm, and he's got the physical tools to do it. And the big questions that we've had is how much do they think that they can teach, and does he need a year to sit? Is it something that they can do in an off season? But yeah, the film that I've watched on him, his arm just really impresses me. That's not something you can teach at all. You can get a little bit of arm strength in the NFL, but you pretty much have what you have. And Van Pelt had also mentioned before that he did think that footwork was something that was teachable, but the big question with him is how much is he going to think is going to be teachable with him, and is it something that he can kind of mold and shape with and run with the offense? But I think I really kind of agree with your assessment there.
I think as far as May is concerned, playing wise, if he does fall to the Patriots at 3 and they do select him, I I think he'd be given the opportunity to battle for the starting job in camp. I also think they'd be comfortable sitting him. And I think they'd be comfortable putting him in later in the year. I mean, as optimistic as any Patriots fans might be, this isn't going to be the championship season. And that being the case, if the Patriots start off, 4-7, let's say, they have 6 games left on the calendar, maybe let May start the last 5-6 games of the season, see how he does, give him a taste of playing, or just sit him the whole year and get the better draft pick. He seems like somebody that's comfortable with himself, which I think is huge in this media market. One thing that I really stood out to me was working his offensive lineman into his NIL deals. That's something I was not a big fan of the dynasty, as you might have seen. One thing that was nice thinking about Tom Brady was he always hung out with linemen. Drew Bledsoe always hung out with linemen. Those were their guys, and they became part of the team and one of the guys. And that's a huge way to endear yourself to your teammates. And I think, not to pick on Mac Jones, but I don't think he necessarily did that in the same way, where it's, a potential star of the team that really makes himself one of the guys in a way that's relatable. I don't think Caleb Williams necessarily does that either. But I do appreciate that out of May, and actually Daniels and McCarthy and the other top guys as well.
Yep. And I think the other thing too, watching a lot of the film on May, is that you just see he's dealt with a lot of adversity at North Carolina, just because his offensive line wasn't the greatest. Like you said, he doesn't really have any kind of weapons to throw to. And he's under constant pressure. So at least that he can handle it in college, and he hasn't been kind of broken there. So it's at least kind of a stepping stone where, hey, we know we can maybe get a little bit better kind of protection for you and see kind of what you could do at the NFL here. So he's had a fight through a lot of adversity already there. So at least you kind of know he's kind of battle tested.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
All right.
Yep. And then I think one thing that I agree with and Kevin agrees with too, at least with May, and I think a lot of the quarterbacks this draft too, is at least, I think, giving them an opportunity to battle for that starting position. But I would prefer them to pretty much sit the whole year, focus on their fundamentals, learn how to read the defenses at the NFL level, go into the year with Jacoby Brissett, where, as you said, the way that they've went about this offseason, I actually like it, but they're not really going to be in position to compete this year. So don't throw him to the wolves like the Jets have done, where he's not ready. If he's ready, like CJ Stroud is, that's one thing. But if he's not, don't throw them to the wolves and then have him just sit most of the year, if you think all the year, and then have him come in year 2 ready to go.
Yep. And I think a guy like CJ Stroud also has the benefit of one of the best left tackles in football.
Exactly.
He had good receivers last year.
Mm-hmm.
Those are being upgraded to great potentially with Stephon Diggs going down there. And he has a good defense. And in addition to that, the AFC South is also not a great division.
Yep.
So he had a lot of things working in his favor, including, maybe lower expectations, lower media pressures than a guy's going to get around here. I think it would benefit, whether it's May or Daniels or anyone else, I think it would benefit them to hold a clipboard, just because you instantly become more popular around here by not playing.
Yeah.
The most popular guy is the backup quarterback. And we saw that with Bailey Zappi. He came in, looked good in a short spurt. When he got some prolonged playing time, the averages balances themselves out eventually. And, he's not, in my opinion, he's not an NFL starting quarterback for a successful team. And that works its way out. Fans kind of turned on him eventually. And now people are excited for Jacoby Brissett. We'll see how long that lasts. But for now, it's good. In April, it's good.
Yeah. And I think one thing too, though, that does worry me, I don't know if you have the same sentiment or not, but even if the front office's plan is to have the rookie start all year, I'm still, based on how this whole offseason has gone, I'm worried about internal pressure from the ownership group of, especially if they start off 1-3, 4-6, to start the rookie earlier than they're ready for. Again, this is just something I'm concerned of. We haven't really seen anything that's going to say that's going to be indicative of what's going to happen, but that's just one thing. Even if front office wants them to sit and that's the plan, we'll see if that will really actually happen to fruition.
I think the Kraft family is the great unknown in all of this. I think you hit a good point there. Bob Kraft has said, as a fan, he would like the team to draft a quarterback, and as a fan, he looks forward to having a new face of the franchise type player. But he is also the owner. And Jonathan, I think, will have a little more influence than he has in the past with Belichick on. And the public doesn't really know how Jonathan Kraft operates. So they're saying he's staying away from the football side of things. We'll see how long that lasts. They've also indicated they might interview for a GM. And I assume Elliot Wolf would at least get an interview for that. I assume he'd get the job. But just the fact that that's kind of hanging out in the air for the public at the moment, makes you wonder, does he need to do a certain thing in order
to get that job?
So stay tuned as far as that's concerned. But I think, Robert Kraft is 84 years old at this point. So he wants to see them win another championship sooner rather than later. I think his main concern, and we've seen it with the Boston Red Sox around here, is a lack of fan enthusiasm. And last year's team lacked enthusiasm. Probably the two most exciting players on the team were Christian Gonzalez and Matthew Judon. They were both lost in week 4 for the season. Kendrick Bourne was exciting at times. He was lost for the season. So it really left you with guys like Christian Barmore, Jelani Tabai to pick up the slack. Stevenson ended the year on IR. I think they end up with 18 players total. So it just was not quality football. And as someone that has to watch the games 3 times and take notes and watch the plays, it got a little torturous at times. So I know I would prefer them having just a more entertaining product on the field. And I think for now, that would be enough to sort of soothe Kraft's fears of losing their place in the pecking order of Boston sports.
Yep. Let's hope that stays true. So we talked about Drake May. We talked about Caleb Williams. And I think Jordan Daniels is probably the next
Jaden Daniels.
Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels is the next comp. I don't know why I wrote down Jordan Daniels. So what I like about Daniels is I feel like his mechanics are a lot better than, and I think you had mentioned this, a lot better than Williams and a lot better than what Mays look like. the concerns that I have with Daniels, and I think Eric has too, is one, the velocity he puts on the ball. Is that going to be something that's going to be a problem up here in New England, especially in the wintertime? We saw it even last year. Like, remember the Zappy game? He could throw in in the snow or the wind.
Right.
And Mac had trouble with that too at times. The other problem is just his size. He's very lean and very skinny, and I feel like he runs first rather than running to extend the play and throw the ball. And I think that's one of kind of the downsides with him, where you see a lot of the successful quarterbacks that are mobile, they run to still throw the ball and extend the play rather than trying to run and gain yards. And that's when you end up getting injuries and getting hurt. We see it with Lamar getting hurt. We see it with other quarterbacks getting hurt. The only one that hasn't really gotten hurt that runs to run is Josh Allen. It's because he's a freak of an athlete. He's what,
Right.
6'4",
He's
6'5", 250 pounds. So, and that's not what Daniels is. So, what were your kind of thoughts on Daniels and how he would potentially fit in?
I like him as a player a lot.
Mhm.
If he weighed, if he weighed 225, he
Mhm.
would be the number one prospect on my board. And I don't even think it would be debatable.
Mhm.
And I do know he doesn't have a cannon like May does. But he has a good enough arm.
Mhm.
But Herm Edwards, who was his coach at Arizona State, also played in the NFL for a while and ended his career playing with Randall Cunningham in Philadelphia, compared
Mhm.
him to Randall Cunningham, which I think is actually perfect comp for him.
Mhm.
But worth noting, Randall Cunningham would have been a Hall of Fame player whose career got sidelined twice by major injuries.
Mhm.
He was unbelievable freak athlete, and especially late 80s, we're talking 35 years ago, a guy like that was unbelievable.
Mhm.
The problem now is you also have freak athletes at every position on defense. So defensive ends, like if you saw Dallas Turner at the combine,
Mhm.
someone like that coming at you full speed, you can't just try to outrun them all the time.
Mhm.
And Lamar Jackson, I do hear that comp a lot. He is in a class with only one other person in my mind, which is Michael Vick,
Mhm.
where they actually do have the sprinter speed to outrun guys. I'm not sold that Jaden Daniels is that level of fast.
Mhm.
And that's also partially football instincts, is seeing the seam and knowing that you can take it there. And Jackson and Vic were both special in that way. But Jackson didn't really become the overall threat he is now, taking his team to an AFC championship game, until he learned to get more comfortable in the pocket,
Mhm.
because teams are going to eventually force you there. So I do like Jaden Daniels a lot. His frame really scares me. And the one other thing that does scare me with him, and this is coming from someone that gives almost zero credence to pro days.
Mhm.
This pro day, it wasn't that he missed throws, because everyone misses, throws, and you're not even wearing pads and it's scripted.
Mhm.
It did make me a little bit uncomfortable just how nervous he looked.
Mhm.
And I that to me is a little bit of a red flag, and not to the point where if Drake May goes two, crossing Daniels off my board. I think he'd still be my favorite to go number three right now. But just seeing him at a pro day look that nervous, you like your quarterback to have a little bit of swagger, and even if it's unfounded confidence, it's just that poise, I think,
Mhm.
more so than anything, that really comforts fans. And I think we saw it early. Mac Jones as a rookie, and when he lost it, he really lost it. He never
Yeah.
got it back. And I'm a little nervous about. Again, I hate reading too far into a pro day. I never really pay much attention to the
Mhm.
throws. I don't chart them. I don't do any of that. I just look for more things like this, interacting with teammates, how they carry themselves, that type of thing. And he looked blatantly nervous.
Mhm.
And the idea of him lining up and looking across at, Quentin Williams or whoever it might be, that doesn't give me a ton of comfort. The one other thing, just to touch on with Daniels, and I'm sure you guys have touched on this. with all of these quarterbacks that have really top-notch wide receivers, you just never know how much credit to give them. And we ran into that again with Mac Jones, having those elite guys at Alabama. In my latest 7-round mock, I think I had Neighbors going 5 overall, and I had Thomas going 28 to the Bills. So 2 first-round picks at wide receiver. And that makes any quarterback look better. But I do like his film. I like him a lot as of right now. If Washington took May, I think I'd be comfortable taking Daniels at 3, although I'd be much more open to listening to trades if May was gone.
Does his velocity at all concern you of playing in New England, especially in the wintertime?
It's hard to say. It's one of those things where this is the gamble of the draft. I think you have to sort of see it to know it. Because I watched a ton of his film. I don't think he played in one cold weather game. So it's not necessarily that he can't do it. It's we've never seen him do it positively or negatively. And the other thing is, which Tom Brady, again, not to compare anyone to Tom Brady, but what made him so great in cold weather wasn't that he had a rocket arm. It was his anticipation and knowing where to throw the ball before the defense was prepared for it. So you can make up for physical limitations with your brain, and Daniels is capable of that. He improved every season in college, and the last 2 years, I know obviously he just came off the Heisman year. The year before that, he only threw 4 interceptions, I believe. So he's a guy that does take care of the ball. His mistakes don't cost him. Part of the reason for the limited interceptions is also that he's not afraid to run if he doesn't see something, something he's not going to have the luxury of doing in the NFL as often. So, just a lot of unknowns with him. I love his talent. I love his physical skills. I don't love his size. And I don't love, how many question marks surround his ability to adjust to a big market, stronger defenders and a cold weather climate also.
Right. I think one of the last names that's really popping up there, which initially surprised both of us. The more film I watch, I can actually somewhat see it, and I can see kind of the upside. Is JJ McCarthy. I know you had mentioned that you really liked his mechanics as well on top of Daniels. I still feel like he'd be at best like a top, probably a 10 to 15 quarterback, and he'd be one of those game managers. And I don't know how much he can elevate a team, but it's also probably because of just the unknown, because we haven't really seen him do it, because he's had that run game at Michigan and he hasn't had to actually do a lot. But he's also a winner, and I know that's not something you can really kind of quantify or anything like that, but they have been really successful with him. And again, a lot of it is the overall team. But kind of what do you see McCarthy, and do you think the hype that's coming kind of up recently with him is real, or do you think it's kind of manufactured, or everyone just looking at him too much and like, oh, why don't we bring him up and he actually might fall, kind of like what what's his name from Tennessee did last year? Will Levis.
Yeah. So to me, I think McCarthy, and this is going back, a couple of months when, I would just post, not seriously take them, but just go through the mock drafts on, Pro Football Focus or something like that. I took at one point Marvin Harrison at 3 overall and took McCarthy in the second round, and people were like, you got to be kidding me. I wouldn't waste the second round pick on him. And so the next week, because I saw where he was rated, and, once you do a couple of those things, you know how to beat the system with mock drafts. So then I took McCarthy in the 3rd round, and people still hated it. And then in one I posted, he was still around the 4th round. And I took him and posted it, and people still hated it. So to me, all along, to me, he's a tweener guy. So, and I've had a lot of quarterbacks ranked in this level. I do it basically by tiers of you're a concrete first round pick, or you're a tweener guy, which means you're probably a second round pick, but because quarterback is such an important position, I would feel comfortable reaching in the right spot.
Mhm.
So I've had guys listed there like Baker Mayfield, Zach Wilson,
Mhm.
Jordan Love, so that where it's a little bit lower risk at the end of the first round, usually to a good team, usually knowing he doesn't have to play right away. What makes McCarthy so appealing is the fact that he's so young. He wins all the time.
Mhm.
He has a great physique in terms of his size and stature, but he doesn't play like someone of that size.
Mhm.
He doesn't have Drake May's arm, for example. If he did, he'd be the number one pick in the draft because he looks like someone that started having a private quarterback coach when he was probably 5 years old.
Mhm.
And, he does everything perfectly. Like you touched on, we have not a great idea as to what he can do because he didn't need to do anything. He
Mhm.
just needed to hand it off. What a lot of people pointed to, and this does have some merit, I think others maybe put more stock into it than I did, is when they beat Penn State, he only threw 6 times all game. And I might be off in that number by one or two, but people were saying they were basically daring him to pass.
Mhm.
Michigan still won the game. But that was a time where you're thinking, does the coach have no faith in him? And I know
Mhm.
Jim Harbaugh is coming out and saying he'd take him number one overall.
Mhm.
Jim Harbaugh has Justin Herbert in Los Angeles. He's not drafting a quarterback, so he can say all the nice things he wants about him, knowing he doesn't have to worry
Mhm.
about it. But I think he's a winner. I think he could be a very good NFL quarterback. I think he has some similarities to a Brock Purdy that
Mhm.
maybe is a bigger guy that maybe has a little bit better of a future. And Brock Purdy's been great, but you need to put JJ McCarthy in that situation. If a team like Minnesota trades up their 2 first round picks and maybe something else to get him, how much do they have to surround him with? Obviously, they
Mhm.
have Jefferson, they have Hawkinson. So to me, he's not in the debate for number 3 for me because the Patriots don't have enough other pieces
Mhm.
around him. The Patriots aren't looking for the highest floor guy; they're looking for the highest ceiling guy based on the position we're in. So to me, he's not in consideration for the Patriots, but I do like him as a prospect, and I don't anticipate he'll get past. I don't anticipate he'll get past 6. He definitely won't get past the first half of the first round.
Yep. No, I think we both kind of agree with you on what you said too. I know because we're been going at it for a little bit, so I'll lump these two in kind of together. Eric and I like Mike Penix a lot. His injury history scares the hell out of me. He's kind of blew up both knees, both shoulders.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but he's got a cannon of an arm.
Yeah.
He's a lot more accurate than people say he is. And he's actually shown speed, which he hasn't had. And then the other player is Bo Nix, where I feel like at best his kind of ceiling to me is kind of a rookie Mac Jones, where he does a lot of the little things, but he's not going to have enough to really kind of put you over the edge. Like he doesn't have the ceiling like Drake May.
So I like both of those guys quite a lot. I think all 6 quarterbacks to me this year, I
Mhm.
don't think would be crazy to be drafted in the first round.
Mhm.
And I have not always felt comfortable saying that about some guys that have gone very high.
Mhm.
But to me, I've targeted Denver as a potential landing spot for Bo Nix.
Mhm.
I think his ceiling is actually someone like Drew Brees, who's a little smaller, who's
Mhm.
mobile, but not for the sake of running, mobile for the sake of buying himself time. He's a very accurate passer. His intermediate passing game was not great prior to this past year. He really worked on that, really improved it tremendously. So, and Sean Payton in Denver was Drew Brees' coach.
Mhm.
So there's a little bit of a tie in there. I don't know if Sean Payton sees him as being a Drew
Mhm.
Brees the way I do, but to me, Bo Nix, if I knew for a fact that the Patriots could get Michael Penix or Bo Nix
Mhm.
in the second round, I would be more than comfortable waiting to do so.
Mhm.
I actually think all 6 quarterbacks will be gone in round 1. But I do like them both a lot. Penix, the medical thing, and I wrote about this recently. Today, I was ranking the top 30 running backs in the draft, and Jonathan Brooks from Texas is a guy who tore his ACL last year. We just don't have privy to the medical information. So, it's a bit of a wild card. If teams that have reviewed it are comfortable with it, to me, he has less of an opportunity to get injured in the NFL than Jaden Daniels does, just based on his size and the way he plays. So sometimes injury history is just bad luck. Nobody throws the ball better than Michael Penix in terms of the spiral, how it looks coming out of his hand. It's literally the perfect way that a ball is supposed to look in the air. And he is athletic. When he played for Indiana, he was constantly running around. And people forgot about that because the injuries, and he didn't really need to do it. So I think he only really ran the 40 just to sort of shut some people up. And I don't think, I don't think either one of those guys will last beyond the first round. I like them both a lot. And if I knew where they were going to land and where the Patriots could draft them, I might take a haul for number 3, especially if May's gone.
Yeah, that's fair. And I know, as Kevin alluded to, I really like Penix a lot. His injury history concerns me. The knees actually don't so much, just because, like you said, he doesn't run as much because after those injuries he doesn't really need to, and I think also partially to protect himself. The shoulder does a little bit, just because we saw what happened to Cam Newton after he had his shoulder injured. So that one worries me a little bit, but if you evaluate the medicals and you're comfortable with it, I'd be fine taking him. Probably not at 3, but like you said, if you know he's going to be around later in the first or in the second. I also like his intangibles a lot, and he has a great deep ball, but he's another one, sort of like Jaden Daniels, where he had elite wide receivers. How much is that affecting him? I think, like you said, a spiral is great, but did that inflate his numbers and his game a little bit too, just having those great receivers? But
Sure. Yeah. And he could have 3 receivers drafted by the end of day 2. And in the national semifinals, he looked like I was getting texts saying, why isn't he going number 1 overall?
yeah,
The national championship, people are like, oh, is he even an NFL quarterback? And it's somewhere in the middle to me. Before either of those games were played, I think I had him going somewhere in the low 20s. In my latest mock, I had him going to the Raiders at 13 overall. If the Raiders want to get back to old Raiders style, having a guy that throws a beautiful deep ball, who's a lefty, who's big, who's mobile, that's Raiders football. So to me, that would be a perfect match. I would happily take him if I were Vegas at 13. Because the thing with all of these, and I talked to somebody on Twitter about it today that was asking me, well, would you feel stupid trading up in the second, as the Patriots trading up in the second round to get Adonai Mitchell, if it turns out you could have gotten them anyway? And you don't know that you're going to get them. That's the mystery in all of this. So, do I feel comfortable with the Patriots trading back? Maybe, but I also have 6 quarterbacks going in the first 13 picks in my latest mock, which, whether or not that happens, I don't know. But I would be more comfortable trading back and staying in that range. But then, obviously, if we draft Bo Nix at number 11, or even Michael Penix at number 11, Patriots fans are not going to love it. So we'll see. I think the best bet for now is stick at number 3. Hope Drake May slides there. And I don't think McCarthy's out of the equation for number 2 even. But one thing that I thought was a tip off, and I might be reading too far into any things, is Washington in the offseason signed Marcus Mariota. And in terms of the player in the draft who most reminds me of Mariota coming out of college, it would be Jaden Daniels, Heisman winner, who is mobile, not a rocket arm, has good height, not necessarily the biggest guy though. And so to me, again, might be reading too far into it, but I think maybe that move was made with Jaden Daniels in mind.
And I think the other one too would be Cliff Kingsbury, you could say, based on the quarterbacks that he's had underneath him. So you had what's his name?
He had
Kyler
Baker.
Murray, he had Baker, he had
Yep.
Patrick Mahomes, just a bunch, and he had he was at USC with Caleb Williams too, right? So
Right.
he had a bunch of different mobile quarterbacks. So
Yep.
Jane Daniels kind of fits that mold more than Drake May, even though Drake May will run, but not as much as Jane Daniels.
I will say one thing for Drake May that was very obvious on film is he needs to learn how to slide. It literally looks like, and I don't mean the Josh Allen, Cam Newton, where you're taking on guys because you can run them over. It looks like he literally doesn't know how to slide, and he's not going to last long in the NFL doing that. So he needs probably his first day of rookie camp, get out, one of those slip and slides and just work on hitting the ground.
Yeah, I was gonna say like the old baseball drill. You put one of those out and just have
Right.
everyone do that for like an hour. So, uh, um, so kind of knowing all the different quarterbacks out there, who do you think they are gonna pick? So, assuming that Daniels does go number two, like you said, do you think it'll be May, or do you think that they would?
I do. I think Drake May is the pick. I think it just goes back to highest ceiling. And I do think McCarthy is more in play than people realize. For example, I think if McCarthy went back to school for one more year and had a good year at Michigan, I think he's probably the number one pick in next year's draft. So the fact that he even entered the draft at all, somebody told him that he was going to be, a first round pick. And so he knew that going into it. But I just don't see him being coached up to have the same ceiling that a guy like Drake May has. Again, to me, it all comes back to ceiling with the Patriots at the moment because they need someone that's going to at least have the ability to carry this franchise. And JJ McCarthy didn't even carry his college team, which he didn't need to. That's not a dig, but he's not that guy. He's more of, like we talked about, everything else around him is perfect and he can get the job done.
All right. Yeah,
so we got fair. And then
go ahead.
Last question for me. I know some fans are wondering this. Do you think the Patriots might double dip at the quarterback, say take one at number 3 and then in a middle or late round, sort of like what Washington did when they took RG3 and then Kirk Cousins? And then if so, is there someone that you have in mind that you would like to see?
Yeah, I fooled around with that a little bit. At the moment, they have 8 picks, and they have more than 8 holes on their roster. So to me, at this point, I think a lot of quarterbacks are going to go earlier than they should. I told you, I think 6 might go in the first round. I don't have any quarterbacks with a second round grade. And then when you get into the third round, the third day of the draft, which like Spencer Rattler will probably already be gone, even though I don't have a second day grade on. The only quarterback that really sticks out to me is Joe Milton from Tennessee. And it's just, again, because of the enormous high ceiling. He has all the physical tools in the world. He has a rocket launcher as an arm. It's big. He's athletic. He was doing front flips at his pro day. Like he's a freak athlete. That said, he's not a great football player. So I watched a lot of his film, and my nephew Will goes to Tennessee, so he was keeping me posted. And he loves Milton, and he's a Ravens fan, though. He's hoping the Ravens draft him. But I would take a gamble on somebody like that, probably around 6 or 7. I don't know if he'll necessarily be around then. There are some teams that need a backup quarterback, and the Patriots aren't in a position where they necessarily need one at the moment. So I have thought about it. It's a good question. I don't love the depth of the quarterback draft. I actually only have 9 overall graded as draftable.
All right. And then one last quick question. What trade offer would have to be to move on for number 3 for you? Well, what would be the minimum you would need to kind of get in return?
Yeah, so I think if Minnesota has 2 first round picks, so that's the most appealing when you're talking about 11 and 23. If you have 11 and 23, I think you also need to throw in a first round for next year from Minnesota. And I think you also need to take someone like Juju Smith-Schuster off our hands and clear up a little salary cap room for us there. But dropping down to 11 and 23, is 11 too early to draft? I'm assuming McCarthy's going to be gone. Is 11 too early to draft Nix or Penix? And then at 23, are either one of those guys still there? So it puts you in a pretty tough situation. I wouldn't feel, let's say that you're comfortable with McCarthy and that you're really comfortable taking 4 quarterbacks high. You still only want to drop down to probably number 5 or number 6, and still pick up maybe a first and a second round to go with it. So, is that something that I would do? I wouldn't if Drake May was on the board, unless you get like the offer the Bears got last year was ludicrous. They got DJ Moore, who's an excellent player in his own right, in addition to this year's first round pick, which was guaranteed to be a high pick. So even if it wasn't going to be number 1 overall, it was Panthers weren't making the playoffs. So I at the time I had no idea why they made that deal, and I continue to have no idea why they made that deal. But so if we got an offer like that, sure, I'm all for it. And maybe even the offer would be, the Bears trying to come back up from 9, because they've been talking about trying to get Williams and Marvin Harrison or something of that nature. They just had him in for a visit today. And they're not taking him 1 overall. So they're at least sniffing out the possibility of moving back up. If we went down to 9 and picked up multiple first round picks or, something of that nature, then you have enough leverage where you yourself can move back up from 9 and go back up to 5 to get May or Daniels and McCarthy. Because the Chargers don't need a quarterback. So they might be more willing to come down. So you end up with a net positive and you still get one of the top quarterbacks. But I don't love it. I think, we have too much time on our hands, and that includes me, to analyze all of this stuff. I think if Drake May is there, you read in the pick and you welcome him to New England.
Yep. Yeah, I think both Eric and I agree where it would have to be an insane kind of haul that you'd be getting, and something that's not realistic probably, unless someone's completely in love with someone and they think that they're going to be the next franchise player for them. But then if they're thinking that, why aren't you thinking that too? So if you think he's the guy, there's really no one that you can really get to really kind of change my mind there. So
the only scenario that works out is if they only love Drake May or Daniels or whoever, and that guy goes too, and you don't really care who you get out of the other guys, you just want one of them.
Yeah.
Or you just say, you know what, let's grab our quarterback next year. That to me is a huge risk. You're looking at a much weaker quarterback class on the surface. Obviously, a guy like Jaden Daniels always emerges, who I had as a 4th round pick, I think, to start the season. And now he's 3 overall on the quarterback rankings. So, there's always going to be 1 or 2 of those guys, but you're not going to have 6 first round worthy quarterbacks in the same draft. For a long time, there's no guarantee that whoever we trade with is going to get a number 1 pick, or that we're going to be bad enough to get. Our defense should be good enough to win 6 games,
Mhm.
you know, and that's going to put you around pick 7 or 8. So
Yep.
stay tuned. But I would take the sure thing.
Mhm.
If May is there, I would take him. If not, if I had a pick today, I would grab Daniels.
Mhm. Yep. No, I think both of us kind of agree on that. So thank you again for all your really helpful insight, and it was really fun to kind of talk the draft and the quarterbacks out there. So thanks again for joining us again.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. You guys do a great job.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So again, Dan can be found on Twitter, X at Dan Kelley 66, and make sure you go follow him. His blogs at patriotsfootballnow.com. Really love reading the stuff there and really enjoy following, kind of interacting there. And glad that Dan has the same takes we have on the dynasty that so many else do. So, so glad to see that. So, thanks again, and make sure you subscribe, rate, and review our podcast, and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Pat's3handlevelpod.com. And thank you again, guys, and talk to you next week.